Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Goss, and I will be moderating this webinar today. Um, and with that, I wanted to share that we will be recording the webinar. It will be made available to all registrants, so you can easily share this with any colleagues in your networks. And then we will also be sharing, and we are sharing, this webinar currently on Facebook Live through the Michigan Sea Grant Facebook page. So you're welcome to go on to the Facebook page if you are an active user, and you can also share this webinar that way. With the webinar recording, we will be adding closed captioning in order to make it more accessible to different users. And we will send out that recording to all registrants along with an evaluation of the webinar later on this week. With this project, I wanted to begin by giving some more background about how this project was launched and how it has been used to support community resiliency in the Saginaw Bay region. So this project was launched in 2015 with a series of decision maker surveys in the Saginaw Bay region of Michigan to increased understanding of coastal storms, in particular extreme storms, and their impact on the region. This webinar series and the surveys that were completed in 2015 is supported by the NOAA Coastal Management Program. And in addition to that funding source, we're also supported by many local partners, including the Bay County Emergency Management Division, East Michigan Council of Governments, Michigan Sea Grant College Program, Michigan State University Extension, the Midland County Office of Emergency Management, and the Saginaw Bay Coastal Initiative. And from the survey results, we determined that the Digital Coast Partnership, supported by NOAA, would be a great opportunity for the webinar to share more information and increase understanding of how communities can take action to increase resiliency and to be better prepared in the face of extreme storms and flooding. Uh, so next slide. So we're going to begin with a poll to gain a better understanding of who's attending the webinar. So if you can please respond to this poll, you can click multiple options, and it will help our presenters be able to better frame their messaging and the information for our audience. So from our results, it looks like most of our attendees are here because they're government employees, but then we also have some representatives from Extension and then nonprofits and then also planning. So next we have and the secondary poll is just to gain a better understanding of where you are from. So the Saginaw Bay watershed in Michigan has 22 counties that are a part either fully or in part of the watershed. So it looks like the majority of attendees are not from the Saginaw Bay watershed, but we will be sharing information that will be framed in the context of the watershed, but it will be useful for really any coastal area. If you would like to, please, if you are a resident in the Saginaw Bay watershed, feel free to share this webinar recording and then the webinar series with any of your local contacts. I'm going to transition this over and introduce our presenters, Joshua Murphy and Brandon Crumweed from the NOAA Office of Coastal Management. They will be discussing the Digital Coast Partnership and sharing information about this partnership and how it can be used by different communities in order to support them in addressing extreme storms and flooding.
Great, thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today on a topic we think would be of great interest to you. Again, my name is Josh Murphy. I'm seen here on the left, and very shortly after my part of the presentation will be Brandon Crumweed. We are part of NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. We have a very broad spatial reach to include both kind of national level interest areas, and that's where I come from, being co-located with NOAA headquarters here in Silver Spring, Maryland. But we also have folks that are embedded in the regions to help us better ensure that the products, services, and information we provide are applicable and relevant to the unique needs of various regions and communities that are contained within. And that's why we have folks like Brandon, who is our Great Lakes geospatial coordinator, who certainly will be able to provide a lot of great context and information to really ensure that you guys are knowledgeable of what we can provide in the Digital Coast as it relates to the Great Lakes region itself. So go ahead to the next slide. All right, so we have another poll for you guys. We wanted to see, for those who are participating in the webinar, how familiar you are with the Digital Coast platform. So go ahead and indicate your level of familiarity. Okay, we got about 70% have voted thus far, and it looks like a lot of you have at least heard about the Digital Coast platform but haven't used it yet. That's great that you have. We have some folks, about 17% or two of you right now thus far, who have used some of it. And we have one person that is an expert. That's also great to hear, as well as someone who has never heard from it. So in those numbers we are sharing with you right now, again, almost 70% of you have at least heard about the Digital Coast but haven't used it yet. So, we're hoping today to provide information that will certainly, hopefully, urge you and really allow you to know a little more about what we have to offer and how you can apply it to your resilience-focused needs. So thank you for that. We'll have one more poll here come up here in just a few slides, but let's go ahead and move on. All right, so if you have heard about the Digital Coast, you're probably very familiar with our website that you see here. But my portion of the presentation is really going to cover a little bit more about the platform itself. And we really do like to think of the Digital Coast less as a website, but more of a holistic platform. And I'll talk about the different components and pieces in just a second, but it's important to know kind of where we're coming from with the Digital Coast. And our approach was really, back when we started this in 2007, our office had long-standing relationships with the geospatial community, GIS and remote sensing, and those continue to this day. And also we had a lot of great working relationships with the coastal management community, and we really wanted to figure out how we could bring those entities together, have them work more collaboratively such that we could really focus on feeding geospatial or place-based information into coastal management decision-making. And so it really, that was kind of the idea for this notion of what we call now the Digital Coast. And so what we like to think of the Digital Coast, if you ask me to describe it, kind of a bit of an elevator pitch, we like to say it's constituent-driven, that we are really listening to user needs and responding accordingly so that it has useful, relevant information. We like to say that it's integrated. In other words, we recognize that our constituent base, our user community for Digital Coast has, they have a variety of different capacities and abilities to use and apply geospatial information. And that's important to us. It means that we can't just rely on one single technology or one single type of information and really think that it's going to be relevant for and meet the needs of our users. We have to have a multifaceted approach. And then we also like to say it's an enabling platform. A lot of what we do in the Digital Coast is not just putting information, products, and services out the door. We want to do it in such a way that we are linking to information that provides context and training that facilitates use and application. Because you see at the end here, it's an enabling platform supporting coastal resource management that is used. We want folks not only to come to the Digital Coast and to learn and to get valuable information, we want folks to use it. Next slide. Right. So when we talk about this being an enabling platform, again, it's more than just the website. So you see, certainly, if you are familiar with the Digital Coast, you're probably familiar with our web platform. You see the URL there. I always tell folks to Google Digital Coast if you want to really get to us quickly and efficiently. But a lot of folks don't recognize that the Digital Coast platform is actually built upon this partnership. If we go to the next slide, you'll know a little bit more about the partnership. Really, it's 8 national level organizations and the NOAA Office for Coastal Management, making 9 groups all together. You may recognize a couple of the groups that you see here on your screen, like maybe the Nature Conservancy, potentially the American Planning Association. But there's probably a couple of other organizations like the National States Geographic Information Council, or NISGIC, or the Urban Land Institute that you may not be familiar with. All of these organizations they basically represent either constituencies that are either practicing coastal management and stewardship, like the Coastal States Organization, the National Association of Counties at various scales, or They are organizations that have a membership that provides subject matter expertise in those areas, thematic areas such as floodplain management with the Association of State Floodplain Managers, or natural and nature-based features with the Nature Conservancy. Having them as a part of the partnership allows us to bring that expertise to bear and to help facilitate connections. Really, a lot of what we hope to do with the Digital Coast Partnership is to connect these organizations that have such a big influence in our coastal communities. And really going back to this notion of a enabling platform and how the partnership really works with us at NOAA to help us better understand how their users, their members use and apply information. And really, where we can make better defined linkages to the work that may be going on in their organizations. Next slide. So we've been around for 10 years now. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary, so actually we're now into year 11. It's a great place to be, and if you've worked in developing and fostering partnerships, you know that they take time and they take a lot of energy and effort. And one of the things that is really great for us at this point is that having that 10 years really means that we're really starting to hit our stride. And one of the things that we've recognized is that there are lots of great benefits to the Digital Coast Partnership for the Digital Coast itself, again, in helping us better understand the unique information needs of various parts of the coastal management community. But we're also seeing these organizations really start to work more collaboratively. And that means that we're able to leverage the Digital Coast platform to bring high quality, coordinated, consistent products and services around different specific thematic areas to our users across the country. And here's a great example of that. One of the really interest areas that a lot of our constituents within the coastal zone, as well as a lot of the Digital Coast partners, really share is in the notion of the use of the community rating system, which is part of the National Flood Insurance Program administered by FEMA. When you have a lot of great interest and a lot of great energy in a couple of different organizations on a particular topic, sometimes you run the risk of having efforts be duplicated and uncoordinated. But being able to leverage the Digital Coast Partnership really has allowed us to take something like CRS and really recognize where our individual organizations have strengths and capabilities to be able to create a more consistent collaborative approach. In this case, you see this is actually developed a series of different products that complement one another that ultimately help, they provide guidance to communities to help them understand how they can leverage open space in their community rating system planning and the ability to be able to do that and integrate as part of their CRS activities. If you're familiar with CRS, there are a variety of different elements that can be leveraged to facilitate flood risk reduction, but also have multiple co-benefits. In this case, this is looking specifically at open space, and you see there's a lot of great products that really there's a nice cohesive thread that can be woven between them. So a great example of how the Digital Coast, being around for 10 years, it's more than just a platform, it's a partnership, and how they really have produced some great coordinated products and services. Next slide. All right, so getting back though to the website, I mean, certainly, we like to say it's more than just data, it's more than just a website, but the website, is really, it's our front door, and it's how folks really know us best. And so here's just a couple of takeaways as to our thinking and how we have put the Digital Coast website together. We want folks to be able to come to the website and be able to get to the information that they need efficiently and effectively. And that's really been a challenge and a good challenge to have over the years as we've added more and more content and information that I'll talk about in just a few slides here. But, we're always kind of making sure that we're checking in with our users constantly and continuously, and really using feedback on their user experience to be able to make modifications to the Digital Coast website. As a result, if you've gone away from the Digital Coast, maybe you haven't seen it in a couple of years and have come back, you'll probably notice that there are some changes, and hopefully they've been beneficial. Again, we want the Digital Coast to be an integrated platform, right? And so that means that we want to make sure that we're making connections to, if there is training that can help someone use and apply data, or a tool that can help someone better visualize information from a particular data set, or a case study that helps someone better understand how someone has used information from a training. We want to be able to make those linkages so that again, it's pretty easy for you to get from one part of the website to the other. And then, at the end of the day, for us, a lot of folks like Brandon and myself and folks within our office, we're geo geeks, if you will. And for us, the real value here is to also be able to demonstrate the role that place-based geospatial information can have and is having in decision making in our coastal zone. Next slide. All right. So again, when I talk about this notion of kind of this is an integrated enabling platform, it's been developed to recognize that, again, that our users have different capacities to be able to use and apply information. And so we have to create multiple entry points for them to be able to get to that information. And so you see here just kind of a schematic that shows kind of how we really intend the Digital Coast platform to work. We want someone to be able to come in and discover information on a particular issue area. We want them to be able to then, if they've got the technical capacity to work with the raw geospatial data, we want to be able to connect them with that data, allow them to download it, or maybe to be able to leverage new web mapping technologies and map it, or go beyond and to actually analyze that data to extract information that could be useful in decision making. And along the way, we certainly want to make sure that we're learning, and learning is a big focus of the Digital Coast platform through our Digital Coast Academy. And then finally, we've heard a lot from our users that they say, they love to hear from us and our partners, but they really appreciate hearing from their colleagues in other communities and what they're doing and how they're leveraging information. So we want to be able to ensure that folks can use the Digital Coast platform to share information. And again, the whole purpose here is to move folks along that continuum on the bottom from data to information to action. Next slide. All right, so that's a bit of an overview of the Digital Coast, kind of a high-level overview so that you ultimately understand kind of where we've been and really kind of what we're all about from a high-level purpose. But now I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some of the products and services that we have, and then going to hand things off to Brandon, who's going to really speak a lot more about some of the different products that we have that are relevant to your region specifically. So this question we're asking here as a poll is, what type of data, tools, and training are you primarily interested in? So based on the information that we have here, we've got a couple of folks, about 25% of you guys have voted now. And of the 5 options, land cover, water levels, green infrastructure, climate change, and water quality, it appears that right now water levels is a front runner, not surprising when you're talking about the Great Lakes, and also good to know because I know Brandon will be covering one of our products that we've developed specifically for the Great Lakes that really focuses on water levels. But it's also important to note we've got about maybe about 61% of the votes in. So if you haven't voted, maybe let's take another 10 seconds here and vote. But it's good to see that, and this is also to be expected. I mean, certainly coastal management it's a broad and diverse discourse, and we know that there's a lot of issues that are important to folks, and so we see that here. You can see now the poll results here of land cover, about 9%, but still someone is interested in that. But then water levels are really coming out. But then also too, issues like green infrastructure, climate change, and water quality. The good thing is that we've got a lot to share in the Digital Coast platform. So I'll try to touch on what we have at these different issues moving forward. All right, next slide. Thank you for that. So we like to say as a part of the Digital Coast, when you go to the website, you see the front page, it says more than just data. It really kind of rubs our data wonks the wrong way within the Digital Coast platform, but it's important to note that data is foundational to what we do in the Digital Coast. And we have, the slide's a little bit out of date. I think now we have almost 100 terabytes of high resolution elevation data. We're actually the largest repository of coastal LiDAR data in the nation. But we also provide access to land cover data, orthoimagery. We actually have a custom application called the Data Access Viewer that allows you to see what data holdings we have for a particular user-specified area of interest, and then you can actually fill in some different user-specified parameters to get, say, LiDAR data in a form that is more useful for your application. With the advent of new web-based server-oriented architectures, web mapping services, and the like, we do provide now access to the ability to connect to our data as well, so you're not just having to download it. And then it's important to note too that it's not just the data that we provide through the Digital Coast platform that we manage in the Digital Coast, that LiDAR, that land cover, and that orthoimagery. It's also we provide linkages to national level coastal data sets that, again, users have told us are important to the coastal issues they're facing every day. Next slide. Data is certainly important, but probably one of the larger growth areas within the Digital Coast are our collection of tools. We have over 50 different decision support and information visualization tools. I will note that, again, with this notion of GIS really moving from the desktop to the web, that a larger proportion of our tools these days are web-based, and that's fantastic for us because it really allows us to expand the reach of geospatial information to folks that only need to have a computer with a web browser and an internet connection to be able to interact and get information from them. So no longer do we have to rely on desktop GIS software packages and resources like that. So very popular part of our website. And if we go to the next slide, I'll just go through a couple of the tools that we have at a national level basis. And I know then Brandon will talk about what we have for the Great Lakes. But one of our most popular tools is the Sea Level Rise Viewer that you see here. It is available for the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, the West Coast, the Pacific Territories, the Caribbean Territories. And then, again, we'll talk about the companion product that leverages the same data and technology for the Great Lakes. But basically, this is our primary tool for allowing communities to be able to visualize with a high resolution what the impacts they may see from sea level rise or coastal inundation in their communities. You see, not only do we provide information on sea level rise, and of note, if you haven't seen this in the last 6 to 8 months, we've recently updated this with new information that provides a visual linkage for a community to actually start to see and start to answer the question as to not only what they may see with regard to inundation in their community, but when, based on the latest NOAA projections of sea level rise. But we wanted to take this a step further, like we do with a lot of our tools. And for those of you who are interested in mapping and flood mapping, there's this notion of mapping confidence that we provide, kind of related to the uncertainty or the confidence in the data. We also take a look at how natural nature-based features like marshes may respond to changes in sea level. We also integrate information on socioeconomic impacts, and then also too for our communities along the U.S. East Coast, this is especially important. They're starting to see high tide flooding, really, and we expect that that will increase in frequency as time goes on. And so we have a part of the tool that's devoted just so that communities can see, when right now their communities are experiencing high tide flooding, what that looks like on a map, and how that may change with just small increases in sea level over time. Next slide. So the Sea Level Rise Viewer is based on web-based mapping technology, and it may be a little bit more technical than some folks are used to. We provide another tool that really was developed to really provide information on a couple of different coastal management topics of interest, but do it in a very easy to understand way, and do it in a way that produces a very tangible output. We worked with the National Association of Counties, which is one of our Digital Coast partners, to develop this Coastal County Snapshot product. You may have seen it. We have 3 different types of snapshots available. The one on the left was the first one that we did, flood exposure. We've then followed that up with a snapshot on the ocean economy, and then our most recent one is a snapshot on the wetland benefits, the role of ecosystem services in coastal wetlands. All of these, they have different data sets and are really geared towards different themes, but they share the same kind of commonalities with regard to how they present information. Easy to use charts and graphs, easy to use language, and again, what you get from this is not some kind of more technical web-based mapping viewer, but this tangible sheet of paper that can be printed and is on both sides, that not only provides information on the issue at hand at a kind of high level, and this is at the county level to be sure, but on the back there's actually information on next steps and how you might be able to take this information and make the linkages to action. Next slide. Another of our more popular coastal flooding tools is the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper. This was developed, we used to have a workshop called A Roadmap for Adapting to Coastal Risks that really allowed us to work with communities and leverage geospatial information, maps, and GIS to help bring different parts of the community together to kind of really collectively understand where they may see overlaps and where there might be opportunities to really work more collaboratively to make their communities more resilient. what we found was that in developing those workshops, there was a lot of time and effort put into actually developing these maps that were critical to the workshop itself. And so we developed this coastal flood exposure mapper tool to really take the data from, say, the sea level rise viewer and augment it with data, inundation data, for a variety of other different areas as well, and then be able to allow the user to very easily and effectively develop simple, easy to understand maps that not only take the flood information, but juxtapose it or compare it visually against information looking at things like community vulnerability, infrastructure vulnerability, and natural resource vulnerability as well. So next slide. I said before that training is a very important part. Learning certainly is a very important part of the Digital Coast, and the way in which we bring all that together is the Digital Coast Academy. 2 years ago, when you would come to the Digital Coast, you would only see about 15 to 20 different traditional classes, either instructor-led, on-site, or online classes that really had traditionally been our paradigm for learning in the Digital Coast. But really, what we've really learned from conversations with our users is that learning has really evolved over at least the last decade or so, and now folks really like to do learning on their own, and they want to be able to to look to a variety of different platforms and products, not just to traditional classes. And so as a result, we've really expanded our training products on the Digital Coast. We have now a little over 190 different learning resources. You see the list there, everything from self-guided resources, what we call job aids, checklists and the like, publications, quick references, videos, webinars, case studies. So again, ensuring that we go beyond just the traditional classroom-based learning to provide learning resources that can help folks really gain a better understanding of a variety of different coastal topics and approaches and tools like social science data and information tools to really help really facilitate greater involvement with coastal management. Next slide. And you see here, this just kind of shows you, specifically looking at learning resources for adaptive communities. You kind of see how this all comes together, all of the different types of, and this is just a snapshot really, this is not exhaustive of the different types of learning resources we have that speak specifically to climate adaptation. There's a variety of different topical areas in which we have a variety of different learning resources on the Digital Coast platform. Next slide. Finally, again, one of the areas that we heard was very important to our users is that what they wanted to know how folks were using the Digital Coast. How were they using the data they were getting? How are they applying the information from the tools that we provide? And certainly for us, we wanted to be able to use the same information to demonstrate the value and the role that geospatial information can play in coastal management. All of that comes together in a part of the website called Stories from the Field. Again, almost 150 different narratives from around the country. You see there's a good tranche of them from the Great Lakes region that really demonstrate how folks are using the Digital Coast. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see just I pulled out a couple of the examples. What are the gold standard for us is where folks are not only kind of using our products and services, but they're actually making an impact on the ground. And you see here's an example from the Eastern Shore of Virginia, not far from where I am here in DC, where you had the Coastal Zone program there in Virginia working with the Department of Transportation in these areas that, this is not a city, this is a pretty rural area, rural part of the Eastern Shore of Virginia, really looking to see and trying to determine, using our sea level rise viewer and the associated data, which areas would be most vulnerable, which parts of transportation, are they critical lifelines, so that really looking at how they can then adjust their policies based off of this. Next slide. And then moving up to New England, really taking a look at a part of the Digital Coast platform called the Economics National Ocean Watch, or eNow, where we're trying to really dig deeper into the role that the coastal and ocean economy plays in our coastal communities. And that data exists at a pretty granular scale for a community to be able to use. But we actually, this is a great example as to how folks from our office worked specifically with Gloucester in Massachusetts to be able to take data that existed at a kind of a county and a statewide level and use the same framework that was used to produce that data to be able to bring that down to a community level that they were then able to use to pull together an economic development plan. I mean, certainly our coastal communities, like a lot of the coastal communities in Great Lakes, are dependent on their waterfronts and their water dependent uses. And so this allowed them to have a better understanding of what's going on as it relates to those uses. And again, use that information to do a better job of making a really great economic plan for their community. Next slide. Great. So that's all I have to offer from a kind of a high level here. But again, one of the great parts of our organization is that we do have folks that are in the region and in the field that are very familiar, that have built the working relationships with folks in the regions and are very familiar with not only what we have to offer, but what the issues are there. And so that's why we've got Brandon here, who's now going to take over and talk about some of the great data and tools that we have specifically for the Great Lakes region. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Josh. Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Brandon Crumwitty. I serve as the Great Lakes Geospatial Coordinator and Remote Sensing Specialist for our office here within the region. I actually sit co-located with the National Weather Service in Chanhassen, Minnesota, or the Twin Cities, but do travel around the region quite a bit. And so today, what I wanted to highlight was some of the data and tools that's unique or specific to the Great Lakes region. Some, of course, that have a national reach as well, like our CCAP data, but how it directly applies to various issues that we're dealing with here within the Great Lakes region. And so up on the screen here is just kind of a hybrid or data fusion between our lake level viewer inundation data layer and our CCAP coastal change analysis program land cover data, actually covering the Saginaw Bay region of Michigan. So I mentioned CCAP, or NOAA's Coastal Change Analysis Program. What few people realize is that NOAA is actually in the land cover business as well. A lot of people are familiar with the USGS National Land Cover Database. And actually what's interesting is NOAA contributes to that data set. We actually map 25% of the contiguous US. And that data that we map is actually then inputted into the NLCD and makes up approximately 95% of CCAP in those coastal areas. Where we really highlight is on the focus in wetlands and coastal land cover classes. And we do an update cycle of approximately 5 years. And one of the things that we're working on, and I'll make mention of it here later on, is the move towards high resolution data. So here's a comparison of between the CCAP classes that you see here on the left versus the land cover classes from NLCD on the right. And where we really break it out is into those flusterine and estuarine wetland classes. And from those, we've heard interest from folks in the Great Lakes, looking at the changes, the dynamics of our coastal wetlands. Land cover data within the Great Lakes is an important way of understanding how the land cover scape changes over time, but then also anthropogenic versus natural footprint on the landscape. And so by using those wetland classes, we get a better understanding than just saying that it simply is wetland. Breaking it out into that scrub, shrub, or forested has different management applications throughout the region. A lot of the CCAP work that has been done in the Great Lakes has been funded through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And what's great is that funding has allowed us to actually have one of the most extensive land cover data sets in the entire nation. In some cases, we're going all the way back to 1975. So in Michigan, for example, we have dates available from 75 to 2016 already that are free of charge for people to download and analyze, as Josh was talking about earlier. You'll notice that for a few of the states like Illinois, Indiana, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, currently the 2016 is saying pending. This is a transition year for us as we start to move from our 30-meter products into 1-meter land cover products. And so what was great is we do have Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin available at 30 meters. And so we have a period of record of over 40 years now that people can go ahead and do these land cover change analyses within the Great Lakes Basin. As a byproduct of that, we've also created what's called a wetland potential data layer. And what this is really to help inform people of the potential likelihood of wetlandness for given areas across the Great Lakes. And this has been very useful in identifying potential mitigation or restoration sites based on soil characterizations as well as the land cover itself. And so this is just an area outside of Toledo showing the highly likelihood associated with current wetlands and the very unlikely, again, associated with the urban built-out environment of Toledo. If you're not comfortable working directly with the data, Josh already alluded to this, we do have a web-based tool called the CCAP Land Cover Atlas, and that allows people to evaluate change from 2 different time periods. So in the example I have here, it's going from 1996 to 2010, and we can see that in that span of time, approximately 5.78% of Bay County in Michigan changed. And you can see where those changes are located. Now, the one caveat I'll note here is you'll see a lot of change associated right along the shoreline. And what that's actually capturing is the changes or fluctuations in water levels. So we've seen wetland gains as water levels go down, and we've seen wetland loss as water levels go back up, which helps me to transition into the next tool that we have available for the Great Lakes and specific to the Great Lakes is NOAA's Lake Level Viewer. Work on this has actually began over 3 years ago. It should actually read 4 years ago with the first official release of the tool in 2014. It was funded through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and since then we've actually already done 1 update cycle to the data that's utilized within that viewer, and I'll talk about that data here in a little bit. The reason that we actually created this tool was, as Josh pointed out, by working with our partners in the region. We heard the need that, you know, current tools and data that's out there is hard to visualize or hard to understand. And what we wanted to do was create a tool that allows people to interact with the data in a different mean. And so what I mean by that is a lot of people are familiar with the Great Lakes Water Level Dashboard. And if you can understand, you know, the trends that go up and down, that's great. The challenge though is how does that directly impact, you know, say a resident that's located along the shoreline? And so what we did is we took this data and used it as input into creating an interactive map interface for visualizing those changes. And so in the example you see here, what we did is we're able now to visualize what it looked like in 1986 when there was record high level water across the Great Lakes region and see what areas were inundated. And so what sets the Lake Level Viewer apart from the Sea Level Rise Viewer is that all of you are aware water levels don't only go up, but they also go down. And so we actually had to create data sets that show water levels as they drop and exposing the lake bottom. This is important for recreation boaters, people that go to the beach. And so this actually was a new challenge that our office had to face in developing this tool, because we're so used to just inundating that we now had to basically double the amount of data that we were pushing out to push through this viewer. And so as water levels go up and down, as all of you are aware, it was important for us to make sure that we visualize that. And so within the tool itself, we actually visualize a plus and minus 6 foot change in water levels to ensure that we cover all the variations in water levels that are present throughout the Great Lakes basins. You know, some of the lakes like Lake Superior, since they're so large, there hasn't really been a huge change in the overall vertical. So just a couple of feet to the record for Superior, up to 4 feet in the Michigan Huron Basin, and of course you can see the differences throughout. And this is again based off of the historical period of record over time. And so here's just an example of showing Hampton Township in Michigan. And as you can see, we were able to go ahead and on the left there, it might be a little difficult to see, there's 3 dark bars that indicate what the current water level is, what the long-term average is, the record high and record low. And so you can go back and adjust the water level to reflect what it was during the period of high record. And so here you can see what parts along the shoreline would be inundated And this has been very useful in helping people to understand the impacts of coastal inundation and flooding. From the manager standpoint, they know where to potentially look for areas prone or subjected to nuisance inundation, or potentially looking at, say, in extreme examples of where to look at when storms really do impact the lakes, like we have been seeing in Lake Ontario. In fact, last year when Lake Ontario did flood, we were actually able to use GPS measurements collected by USGS to validate what was being seen in the viewer itself, and the results matched up very well. And if anybody's interested in that study, I'm happy to provide that information to you. Another thing where we've utilized a lot of these different data sets available through Digital Coast to address a particular problem was through a project that kicked off a few years ago called the Green Infrastructure Costs and Benefits for Flood Reduction. And for this project, we actually developed a framework using the cities of Duluth, Minnesota, and Toledo, Ohio, to look at how do communities adapt to flooding, whether that be from extreme rain events like what occurred in Duluth in 2012, and actually just recently this last week, to looking at nuisance flooding due to low-lying areas, and that's where we use the city of Toledo. And so through that process, we developed these 6 steps that communities can use, and as Josh pointed out, we have these available as training resources and actually kind of fact sheets and guides to walk people step by step through each of these different phases to then find out what results work best. And so what we did is we actually went into the communities of Duluth and Toledo, and here we just have an example showing data that was collected. This is basically nuisance flooding, and you can see the number of people reporting in that they've had water in their basement in the past, or seen water standing in the streets, or water standing elsewhere, like in a softball field or baseball field. And so we were able to take this information and work with partners in Toledo to analyze a specific watershed. In this case, we were looking at Silver Creek in the northern part of Toledo. And this is just showing what future, so taking into account climate change and projected precipitation, if the community was to look at this without doing any type of flood storage or utilization of any type of green infrastructure or nature-based infrastructure to help with reducing the flow or storing the additional flow. And so what you'll notice here is there was 293 buildings modeled that would be impacted, with a total damage cost of around $980,000. We then take and model that and bring in the flood storage that would require to keep it at current flood levels. And you'll notice that that count goes down to 179 structures with only a total of 527,000 in damages. And by doing these type of exercises, the communities were able to outreach to their community and decide what would be the best strategy. Should we, work on a rain barrel for every house type of approach? Should we look at saving our natural infrastructures like wetlands or open spaces, as Josh pointed out earlier, to figure out the best strategies forward? And so in the case with Duluth, they actually had a public outreach workshop where they even offered up, strategies for homeowners to put in rain gardens and rain barrels, to businesses utilizing permeable pavement and other infrastructure to help with flood storage or again, natural base. Now again, these costs only reflect the damages that would have been reduced. The other thing that when you start implementing natural-based infrastructure like, saving wetlands, is there's an ecological benefit to that as well. And these numbers do not actually reflect those costs. And so again, that's something that we've continued to work on in the future. And so just to wrap it up, there are several resources available. And as Josh said, there's folks here in the region to help out as well. And so feel free to peruse or start looking more in depth on the Digital Coast, and just wanted to provide information here. The URL to the website is located at the top, And then if you want to email us, there's the email provided there. We do also do social media through Facebook as well as Twitter. So make sure to follow us and follow our tweets. And with that, I'll turn it over to Megan.
Thank you, Brandon and Josh, for sharing all of that information about the NOAA Digital Coast Partnership. Before we discuss the upcoming webinars, I wanted to extend some time to the participants to see if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask at this point for the NOAA Digital Coast and how you might be able to use this with stakeholders in your region. To ask any questions, if you have any, you can enter them in the webinar chat, and then we can direct those to Brandon or Josh. Emily had a question about if this presentation will be made available after. Yes, we are recording this webinar. We will share it with all registrants following closed captioning, and we're also sharing this webinar live right now on Facebook Live via the Michigan Sea Grant Facebook page, and we will send the webinar recording along with an evaluation to all registrants following today's webinar later on this week. So since it doesn't look like there are any questions related to the NOAA Digital Coast Partnership, I would just like to extend our thanks again to both Josh and Brandon for presenting on this partnership and how we can use the data and tools in our local communities to better understand lake levels, and then also ways to be more resilient for extreme storms and flooding, especially the green infrastructure planning documents. Upcoming for our webinar series, we have another webinar that will be taking place next week at this time related to extreme storms and hazard mitigation strategies. Mike Sobaczynski from the Michigan State Police will be presenting on different types of hazards in Michigan, including extreme storms and flooding, and then he will discuss hazard mitigation planning efforts that support community resiliency. In July, we'll have a presenter discussing the National Flood Insurance Program Community Rating System. And Josh had mentioned the community rating system and how the NOAA Digital Coast Partnership helps to provide support for that as well. But with this, attendees will get to learn more information about the community rating system and how communities can reduce flood insurance premiums for local property owners by completing different flood protection activities. If you registered for this webinar, you are registered for all three, so you will receive email notifications if you can't attend. We will send out a recording of the webinar just like we are going to do for this one following that webinar. And with that, if you have any questions, you can ask me now in the chat, but you can also email me. My email is listed here on the screen, and I would be happy to answer any questions with regards to the webinars and then also the surveys that were completed back in 2015 that were used to help support the planning of this series. So I hope you all enjoyed today's webinar and the information that was shared by Josh and Brandon about the NOAA Digital Coast Partnership, and we look forward to you all joining us for future webinars. And please share the webinar series and the recording of this webinar with any partners in your local networks. We'd like to share this information as widely as possible, and we appreciate any assistance you can provide with regards to that.